By the end of the night, you will be equipped. If you feel that this is a national issue, that if you feel that this is a national threat to our nation, you will be equipped to go out and speak about this to your neighbor and maybe even engage somewhat nationally. That's what our hope is for Bill and I tonight. So, we'll give you just a little bit of the agenda here. We're going to start with the basics of the federal debt in just a minute. Bill's going to come up and start us with that. We're going to analyze the federal debt. Then we're going to watch a 30-minute video. And then, the most important part of the night, you're going to stand up and give us some thoughts, input, and ideas that you may have. All right? So that's how we're going to roll through it. We're going to get started. I want to introduce Bill, and I really appreciate Bill's willingness to do what he's doing. He spent a decade analyzing and looking at the national debt, and pretty soon he got to the point where people weren't really listening anymore. It wasn't that big of an issue. So he just quit. And last summer, I was introduced to him. I've never known him before last summer, and I was introduced to him, and I asked him if he would be willing to come out of retirement and start talking about the national debt again. And he said that he would. And his motive, and this is what I really appreciate about Bill, his motive is just to tell the truth. He just wants to tell the truth. So he may challenge us a little bit, but that's okay. So let's go ahead and give a welcome for Bill Plummer.
I can't talk as loud as Steve can, so I'm going to use the microphone. Yes, I'm a retired IBMer. At the time I started with IBM, and this is a little background, at the time I started with IBM, we were a monopoly, allegedly, and we rented our equipment, we serviced our equipment, we fixed our equipment, and then we took it back when they didn't pay the rent. Based on that business model, it was imperative that we as engineers creating this equipment looked upon it as something which could have a finite life, 5, 10 years, and during that time, if we make a mistake, we had to go out and fix it. So you hear the word now occasionally, unintended consequences. Familiar words? We couldn't afford to have unintended consequences because if you goofed it up, you had to go out and fix it. So my mindset was sort of shaped by that for a number of years, that we had to be very careful about everything we did and look at a wide view of things to decide what out there is going to come down and bite us. Because those problems that you shipped out to the field, they did not go away. They did not go away. You had to fix them. So I came to a group about 10 years ago, much like you're here as a group, not knowing too much, if anything, about the subject of the national debt. In fact, when I went to that meeting 10 years ago, I wasn't even thinking about the national debt. I was thinking more about Social Security, because you can tell by the color of my hair, I'm on Social Security. So I'm sitting out there in the audience, and the speaker up there is starting to say things that don't quite make sense. I don't know enough about it to know why they don't make sense, but the numbers don't quite add up. So this IBM thing that's in my mind says, this guy is not telling me the truth. I better find out what the truth is. So I went out and started digging and digging and digging to find out what the truth was, mostly about Social Security and the funding of Social Security. And that led me into looking at how does that interact with the national debt. And that's how I kind of got into this thing. So what I'm encouraging you to do is sitting out there, we may say some things you don't quite think is right. Go study it. You have the advantage of the internet. You can go to a source data, such as the USTreasury.gov, and you will find all the information that I'm going to use. Or you go to the Social Security Trust Fund site, you'll find out all the information I have. I'm not using anything that you can't find in terms of numbers. So we're going to start out by talking a little more about, not numbers, but the definition. What do these words mean when people talk about the national debt? First thing is, the word national debt is not an official term. If you go to the U.S. Treasury website, you will not find anything that's called the national debt. That's a coined phrase that has come into general use. What you'll find is you'll find something called the debt held by the public, and the debt held by government accounts are sometimes called the intergovernmental accounts. You add them, I'll walk away. When you add those two together, you come up with a total debt, which is now called the national debt. The reason I bring that up is about 7 or 8 years ago, when Larry Summers was in his previous position with the Clinton administration, he decided to start calling the debt held by the public the national debt, just because he was in a position to do it. Why did he do that? Because the debt held by the public is a much smaller number. So he thought, well, I'll just lower the debt by just calling it something different. So watch out for the word, watch out for the terms. Okay. Let me get this out of your way. To start putting numbers on it, the debt held by the public. Now, what is the debt held by the public? If you go out, in fact, no, none of you, do any of you own any treasury securities? 1, 2, 3. I bet lots of you own treasury securities. Have you ever bought a war bond or a defense bond or a savings bond?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Okay. Now here's another surprise for you. I bet everybody in this room owns treasury securities. Why is that? When you work, if you're not working now, or if you're in business, money was taken out of your paycheck, or you sent it in to pay for your Social Security money. That money, if there was a surplus, and they always took in more than they needed, that money was invested in treasury securities. Right now, there's about $2.4 trillion worth of your money invested in treasury securities. You didn't volunteer to do that, but that's where they all sit now. So the debt held by the public, if you bought them, you can buy treasury securities called bills, notes, or bonds that have a maturity date of everywhere from a couple of days up to 30 years. That's what they are. When you buy one of those treasury securities, you give them your money, they give you the bond, and you go off into the Neverland. Because they don't see you again until you bring your bond back to cash it in, that maturity. They cannot just bring that bond back anytime they want their money back. So once they sell that bond, it's gone, you own it. You can take that bond and you can sell it. You can buy a bond and you can sell it to your neighbor. It's a marketable security. You can resell it, you just can't take it back to the government. So when you hear about people dumping treasury securities, they can't literally dump treasury securities. The debt held by the government accounts is a little bit different. That's the money we just talked about, the surplus in the Social Security Trust Fund and about 50 other trust funds is invested in government securities. Those securities are slightly different. They're not offered at auction. They are sold to you, your surplus, at a negotiated interest rate. That's the difference between those two. You add those two together, you get the total of the national debt. Now, people say, how can I get a handle